So as we have been discussing, I think that regardless of your position on HISA as an entity, I think General Landry said it perfectly well, that everyone in this room, and I think every participant in racing, has wanted uniformity for some time. We all want uniformity, but the tagline that I continue to try to at least convey from the national HBPA standpoint, we want uniformity based on science. We need it to be based on research, peer-reviewed, and that's how an establishment of proper uniformity needs to be. In our opinion, certainly my opinion, we feel as if the way that the legislation was drafted, it doesn't lean towards necessarily being based on science. I think there's a lot of opinion in there. Now, we can talk about LASIX until all of us turn blue, but I'm not here to do that. I continue to try to go around a discussion on LASIX, not because it's not important by any means. I think it's extremely important. But peeling back the layers of the onion is, was that piece of legislation written specifically around furosemide based on science? And the answer is no. I don't think anybody can dispute that, not even the AEP. So again, our point is we feel as if anything moving forward needs to be based around science, but also the newest tagline that I've come up with, I feel as if it has to be built from the ground up. What we've seen and what I feel like we've all incurred is something being pushed from the top down. It's initiatives from individuals that have exacerbated a horrible situation in Santa Anita. Nobody is disputing that. There's nobody in this room that didn't feel devastated by what happened. But at the end of the day, I don't think that it's fair to label what happened at Santa Anita or what happened with some of the trainers who were in the doping scandal as a blanket statement that covers all of us, and that horse racing is full of rampant doping cheaters. That is not a correct statement. I hope everybody heard me. That is not a correct statement. We have facts to back that up. You know, I mean, I do look to Ed quite a bit for factual information on how many tests are done. What's the percentage that we have as positives? So don't drive a piece of legislation based off perception. Again, if anybody knows me in this room, you probably know that my most hated cliche is perception is reality. Reality is reality. And if you drive your reality based off perception of others, then you're going to be going down the wrong road. We have to base everything on facts. The fact is we need uniformity. I'm not going to argue that. I think I was the first, and maybe we were the only organization that called for independent evaluations of the racetrack in 2019 of Santa Anita, because it needed to be done. I don't think anybody at Santa Anita or California disputed that it needed to be done. You know, those are things that we have to address, and we need to address them quickly. So how can we do that? That's what I'm hoping that this panel will give some input to, but I want to just address a few points. I think that Attorney General Landry said it best, that, you know, HISA right now isn't working, okay? But I want to make sure everybody understands. I'm not talking about the rules and regulations, right? We all appreciate the rules and regulations that HISA is trying to put together. Again, there is some input now from horsemen on the regulations themselves. We can shape regulations. We've been doing it. Who's on the Model Rules Committee? That's what we do, right? So we can keep doing that. But HISA as an act, we believe, is not the right thing. And so if you don't have a foundation, of what you're building to be stable and, oh, by the way, legal, then the regulations don't matter. I don't think anybody in this room would dispute that there are definitely positives within the HISA regulations. There are things that we need that are in the HISA regulations. And again, everybody wants uniformity. So now we're looking at it at a different lens, right? We didn't have HISA before, so there were certainly people who felt as if you know, you've had this opportunity for how many years? I've heard that argument. I understand it. I'm not going to dispute it. But now we're looking at things differently. But we need to be moving from the ground up, and I think that starts with commissions. I mean, at the end of the day, I feel as if sometimes I'm waving a flag to save commissioners' jobs. No joke. Because if the regulation pushes through, as it appears to be moving along, commissions could go away to some extent, at least in the thoroughbred world. And I predict, and I think my friends in the other breeds would also predict, there's going to be an influx into the other breeds at some point. At least they're getting an opportunity to help be prepared, but they're also taking this opportunity to help with the charge of opposition. So building from the ground up, making sure that the commissions are involved. I think that at the end of the day, there is light at the end of a tunnel, that a compact for states now, utilizing what I would consider the Model Rules Committee as sort of the entity that we all look to stamp uniformity, I think it's there. And the existing infrastructure is there. How many of you owner-trainers appreciate having to get your license from Pat, but now you got to register, now you got to re-register all your horses. You're going to probably at some point have to re-register all your employees. All of this duplicative data that's being collected is burdensome. I mean, I have a good friend that's a pretty big trainer. Literally now, it's not uncommon. They're having to hire people to just do that work. That work's already been done. Why are we focusing on that when we want to be focusing on getting uniformity, maybe spend that money in research? I think the compact is the way to go. There are certain other options, but certainly we've got to abide by the rules where they are, or when they are in place and while they're in place. But we're going to be looking at other opportunities and certainly other alternatives. So, Peter Eckebert, you met earlier. I'll just look to him first. He's going to discuss some of the specifics of a compact, and then we'll go down the line, if that's okay.
Yeah, one point, Eric, on the point that you made about the regulations and that they are some beneficial, but the thing that continues to bother me is the lack of transparency and the lack of accountability. And while we've got some input, how much that is or what that is without transparency, who knows? And that's a real big issue. The compact is one of the oldest mechanisms that's been around since before the Constitution was drafted, and it's basically a vehicle where states get together and agree and come up with a contract under various terms and conditions to act cooperatively. It started out initially was with the boundary disputes, and then now it's taken on a whole different form or a larger role, and its broadest form is it deals with regulatory matters and administrative matters, which fits perfectly into our situation for the compact to step up and be a form that can be used to govern uniform medication rules, safety rules, laboratory testing rules. The compact can be used for all those things. It can be very responsive. It allows states to adopt through the compact. The regulations are adopted and apply to all the states that are members of that compact. It also allows the rules to be amended where they then have uniform application, so you don't have to go back to each individual legislature and get permission to amend or change or adopt rules. So it allows for a responsive and a quick resolution and a quick adoption of the rules with respect to, in this situation, medication and as well as safety and testing. The compact, as far as enforcing the compact, it's sort of has concurrent statutory and contractual elements to it. The statutory involves within the member states because it's approved within the state and has that sort of force of law. Between states, it's based upon the contract that's entered into among the various states. It's a creation of state government, and under certain circumstances, you get, with the approval of the Congress, it then has the force of a federal law under the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution. The compact we're talking about here of equine medication allows for, like I said, uniform rules to be adopted, allows for a governing body called a compact commission, which, it becomes the details is where the devil resides, but it's the compact commission. Usually we would consider that to be a member of a racing commission or a designation, person designated as representative from each state that's a member of the compact to be a member of that commission. That commission then is the governing body that decides on the rules and regulations that will be in place. And once enough states have approved the compact, then it becomes active, and its officers are appointed, and members of the representative states are become the commission. And the authority that the commission has is for the adoption of those rules. One possibility is that the ARCI model rules on medication and drug testing have become adopted as the base for the compact commission, and then moving forward with amendments. After there is a publication and notice requirement for the rules that would give everyone an opportunity to comment, similar to what we have currently under the ARCI model rules. But that's just generally an overview of a compact.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate that overview. And again, working closely, especially in DC, regarding HISA and the legislation, I've been able to really develop a good friendship with Mike Tanner and with the USTA and our lobbyist group in DC, the Ingram Group. We've continued to try to work with certain representatives on looking at other alternatives. And we've definitely found some, in particular one representative in Texas who's very interested in composing an alternative to HISA. He actually was one of the original co-sponsors of the bill when it was in the House, but he also was very quick to point out what he ended up signing on to was not what ended up being not debated in the Senate, and then became the COVID slip-in bill, as we've referred to a few times. So with that, as you might know from the proceedings book, Russell Williams was supposed to join us here today, but due to an illness in his family, he was unable to make it. Although don't feel too bad, he's stuck in Italy. So he's eating well, so I'm very happy that Mike was able to join us. So Mike's going to talk a little bit more about some of the initiatives that we've been trying to push forward in DC.
So thank you, Eric, and I apologize you're getting the B team today from the United States Trotting Association. Russell prepared remarks that I am going to deliver. I will preface this by saying that Russell is a man of letters, and I'm more like a plumber. I'm more concerned with fixing things and processes and getting things done. Russell sees a bigger picture, and he's wonderfully well-read, and I think his remarks will reflect that. And I think he really gets to the heart and the philosophy of why we are in this opposition against HISA, right there with just about everybody in this room, and especially with Eric, who I've gotten to know and really respect and admire and work with over these past 5 years. So here are Russell's remarks. The ancient battle between analytic science and arbitrary authority rages on. The HISA statute contains a map of that battle, and in explicit language, HISA resolves the conflict in favor of arbitrary authority instead of science. And we shall look at that in just a moment. The classic example of the conflict between science and authority is Galileo. He spent the last 40 years of his life under house arrest because he demonstrated scientifically that the earth revolves around the sun. Albert Einstein admired some of Galileo's scientific papers, finding their scientific method above reproach half a millennium after Galileo wrote them. But it wasn't until well after Einstein that Pope John Paul II came out and stated that Galileo wasn't a heretic after all. It was just a matter of interpreting some language in the Bible, the Pope said. Well, given that the HISA hierarchy has already told us that the new HISA medication rules will be our Bible, we may find ourselves wondering whether things have changed much in 500 years. What religion is now governing us? Science provides a basis of shared truth that arbitrary authority cannot. If a medication or safety regulatory program can point to recognized scientific principles, there is accountability to the facts, and all regulators should be held accountable in this way. Changes in scientific knowledge would lead to changes in the program. Now, on the other hand, if decisions are based merely on the opinions or perceptions of those in authority, then there's no shared truth, and hence no accountability. Decisions and definitions could only change depending on who is in power. Now, that's authoritarianism, not accountability. We shall see authoritarianism spelled out in the language of the HISA statute. Racing medication is a matter of sports medicine, something that today's public understands. We had a chance to talk with a physician who did medical research some years ago on the case of Rick DeMont, who set a world record in the 400-meter freestyle at the 1972 Olympic Games. The IOC took Rick's medal away from him because he was using an ephedrine inhaler for his asthma. Rick had disclosed his asthma and the medication before the Olympics. It turned out that the medication might have been permitted if the medical committee had not botched reporting procedures within the organization, but we'll never know. Rick's gold medal has never been returned to him. The researchers wanted to see if ephedrine is performance enhancing, as Rick DeMont had been using it. They conducted double-blind, placebo-controlled studies using monozygotic twins, triplets, and unrelated subjects. Several peer-reviewed papers resulted, establishing that ephedrine at therapeutic levels is not performance enhancing. Can scientific studies establish that medicine used in horses is not performance enhancing? The medicine Rick used was called salbuterol, from the same family as albuterol and clenbuterol. And recently, Professor Ken McKeever, the Associate Director of the Equine Science Center at Rutgers University, produced a peer-reviewed paper reporting his studies of clenbuterol. And McKeever showed that clenbuterol at therapeutic levels is not performance enhancing. We took the McKeever study to the Association of Racing Commissioners International, but no change was made to the ARCI model rules because the RMTC, the Racing Medication and Testing Consortium, was opposed to that change. Several alumni of RMTC are now making decisions at HISA. Will the HISA authority be receptive to basing regulatory decisions on scientific truth, or will they decide questions based on their own biases? I submit that past performance is the best predictor of future performance. That's why we have race programs. Get ready for arbitrary medication and safety regulation. We can see in the plain language of the HISA statute that the HISA authority will prefer arbitrary authority to science in making its decisions. In section 3055 subsection D, the statute imposes a blanket 48-hour ban on the administration of any substance to a horse. The statute goes on, obviously this eliminates any use of Lasix in racing horses. And the statute goes on to provide in section 3055 subsection E for a study conducted by industry experts, including a member designated by the Anti-Doping and Medication Control Enforcement Agency, now known as HIWU. The study is to concern the effect of furosemide on equine health, the integrity of competition, and any other matter the HISA authority considers appropriate. The study group is given 3 years to come up with a report that will include recommended changes, if any, to the 48-hour ban. The board of the HISA authority may modify the ban based on the study report, but only by a unanimous vote. The section goes on to require that the unanimous vote must unanimously adopt the following findings. The modification is warranted. The modification is in the best interests of horse racing. Furosemide has no performance-enhancing effect on individual horses, and public confidence in the integrity and safety of racing would not be adversely affected by the modification. So HISA calls for a study conducted by a group that the HISA authority puts together with no requirement of scientific methods or validity. And even so, the study results can be invalidated by the opinion of any one member of the HISA authority. No explanation is required for this opinion. Nothing, for example, could be more arbitrary than the opinion of one HISA authority board member about public confidence in racing. In its simple authoritarianism, the opposite of accountability, that sets up a rigged and unscientific study, and then, in case the study recommends an exception for furosemide, to provide for a unilateral veto on the basis of any one of 4 measures by any one person. This part of the HISA statute spells out in its own words that science will have no part to play in HISA regulatory decisions. Arbitrary opinion will rule, even if it's the opinion of a single board member. Now, as part of our ongoing legal challenge to HISA, we recently received an unfavorable result in the Sixth Circuit. And I can explain why this decision is wrong. HISA is modeled after FINRA, the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. Imitating the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority is exactly what we should expect from the wealthiest and most privileged sliver of the horse racing elite. FINRA takes its authority from the Maloney Act of 1938, which allowed the over-the-counter markets to regulate themselves. The courts have consistently held the Maloney Act to be constitutional. The Sixth Circuit decided that the HISA authority has most of the characteristics of FINRA. FINRA is based on the Maloney Act. The Maloney Act is constitutional, so HISA must be constitutional. The error becomes evident when you contrast what Congress expects FINRA and the HISA authority to do. FINRA is supposed to make sure that investors receive protections. Security sellers are tested, qualified, and licensed. Advertisements are truthful and not misleading. Security products are available, suitable for investor needs, and investors receive full disclosure. Congress required the HISA authority, on the other hand, to develop and implement a horse racing anti-doping and medication control program and a racetrack safety program. That's in section 3052, subsection A. FINRA's duties are basically clerical. FINRA only has to monitor the financial industry and make sure that adequate protections are in place. The HISA authority, on the other hand, must bring into being an entire program to regulate the use of medicine and performance safety measures in an athletics sport. The constitutional problem is not simply that the regulated industries do such different things. The problem is that a one-size-fits-all approach to the Maloney Act, and anything that resembles it, potentiates and even encourages arbitrary actions by regulators. When the regulator is a private corporation that chooses its own decision makers who cannot be removed by any legitimate government official, the industry it regulates is guaranteed to suffer and perhaps to collapse. Now, it's hard to stand up against the kind of tremendous power that made HISA a reality, but Galileo never gave in, even though he no longer could publish his findings. When his remains were moved in the 18th century, they kept several of his bones, including the middle finger of his right hand. You can see it today in a glass case at the Galileo Museum in Florence, Italy. It kind of looks like this.
Is he bringing it back?
I'll have to ask him. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mike. That was a great rendering of Russell's. That was perfect.
I wasn't sure I was going to go there, to be honest.
Great. Well, I think most everybody in this room also recognizes there's a lot going on in Texas. So I think that without trying to take away from what Dr. McNabb's going to speak on, Texas has definitely taken a stand. No pun intended or cliche. The importance of the overreaching government authority that most people currently see as HISA was certainly met with some vigor when it came to the state of Texas. And they did take the option to not export their signal based off of certain reasons that I don't want to go into from a litigious standpoint, but at the end of the day, Executive Director Amy Cook has been very vocal on the situation. I met her December of last year with Joe Lucas, actually from the Oklahoma Racing Commission, and we were able to talk to her in the infancy of her beginning her position on what we saw as a view of what was happening with the legislation. And she certainly took that into account, made her decisions, and certainly pushed forward with the commission. So we are pleased to have Dr. Connie McNabb here, the vice chair for the Texas Racing Commission. She's going to talk a little bit more on some of the aspects that Amy has put out into the press, including the Master Cooperative Agreement. Again, under the banner of there are alternatives that can be established and be constitutional.
Thank you. Howdy. Uh-oh, everybody's gone to sleep. They just had lunch. Howdy. Okay, I got an audience. That's wonderful. Amy sends her regrets. She's fighting for our organizational life. It's the legislative session in Texas. And if you think that football is the #1 spectator sport in Texas, you're wrong. It's going on right now down in Austin. So we are reinvigorating our agency, and then HISA on top of it. It has certainly been an interesting year, and we have been so blessed that Amy walked through the door as she was retiring out of the Guard and said, I'm interested in a job. And Judge Pate and I were just like, oh, yes, please. So Amy and I think very similarly on a lot of things, and I'm going to take you up to at least 30,000 feet and maybe a little bit higher, but you don't need to put on oxygen. You'll be able to do okay. But as we have looked at what HISA has been trying to do, Amy and I we share a very common background. Both of us were career military officers in the Texas National Guard. I was in the Air National Guard because we're cooler. But Amy is very, very tough and very, very smart, and we both shared an opportunity we took our turns at both being the Chief of Staff for Texas Military Department. So I was in it for a couple of years, managed to get out of there. A couple of years later, Amy was in that same office. And we manage a budget of $500 million, that is with a B, $500 million comes in just to the state of Texas, because we have 25,000 Army troops and about 5,000 Air Force troops, and we have airplanes, and we have tanks, and we have guns, and we have got every imaginable thing. And so here, as Amy and I have taken a look at, here's this thing called HISA, and they are trying to impose strict federal standards upon an industry, and then they go and invent this crazy thing, and it's just, I mean, Amy and I are both kind of like the RCA dog. We're like, why are they making this so hard? This does not have to be so difficult. So I'm going to guardize you a little bit, and that's we're going to teach you how to be states' rights National Guardsmen. Number one, we're looking at legislative intent, and I don't think anybody really disagrees with the basic intent that national standards to raise the level of accountability and integrity in racing are what we all want, and I don't think anybody disagrees with that. And that's one of the few things that we say with this. Yeah, we agree with that. But uniform national standards are also highly attainable by another mechanism. We're going to get into that in a minute. One of the things that has certainly been a burr under the saddle in Texas, and pointed out very clearly by our chairman, Judge Pate, is that state control, our state statute, specifically does not allow us to relinquish our responsibility and control over racing. And I don't think anybody in the State House even now is changing our state statute. So we are not going to relinquish our state control, even though we do agree national standards, more integrity, all that's very good. But state control and state sovereignty is not on the table and doesn't have to be. And then lastly, we'll get in a little bit on state-to-state support. So in the Guard context, World War II, everybody went to war, everybody came home. the whole military capability of the nation kind of went way down. People went back to their states. Guardsmen who in their states had just, been turned into soldiers went to war. And DOD kind of felt this big sucking sound as, things start happening around the world that they wanted to respond to. And they realized that there's a lot of talent out there that they sent home. People said, hey, this was fun being a soldier, but I'm going home. I've got a family, I've got a job, I've got a career, I'm going to use my GI Bill. And so they developed the reserves, but then they had the Guard, because the National Guard, the militia, has been around since before there was a Constitution. That the governors control their militia. So DOD said, let's make a deal. And this eventually became a master cooperative agreement. They have established, and this has been going on for decades, they established for every single person who wears an Air Force uniform or an Army uniform, if they are in the Guard, they have established definitive and exhaustive. Here are your training standards. Here are the standards you must meet to be promoted to such and such a rank. Here are the standards that you must maintain, the equipment that we allow you to have. I don't know if you all have ever been around when there's been a Guard deployment. Texas has invaded. We have responded to Louisiana a couple of times. But our C-130s say United States Air Force. There's a little tail flash that says Texas. But, all of that stuff belongs to the feds, but we are responsible. We maintain it. We keep it going. And in return, these things way exceed our state budget. Now, every governor can call up their National Guard, but when they do that, they call it state active duty. So essentially, they're calling us up in state status. That's going on right now down in the Rio Grande Valley, and Governor Abbott and so forth, and those people are in state status. But at any given time, the needs of the nation call up. DOD says, okay, Texas, you're on the hook. And you're on the hook for the 36 ID and the 136 Airlift Wing. We have been trained to a standard set by DOD. We have been equipped with the equipment that we need to go to war. It's not little plastic soap guns. It's a real thing. It's a real live C-130. It's a real live M16. It's a real live Abrams tank. Belongs to big DOD. When they say the bell's going up, we have been giving you the money that you maintain the equipment, you train the people. Here is the standard. $500 million every year coming into Texas, and in return, we have to answer to them, where did the money go? So there is full transparency. Where did the money go? Did the money get spent where we told you to do it so you could meet the mission that we gave you? So we have to demonstrate that. Or if indeed there's equipment, the whole world stops if we come up short with one bullet after a training exercise. We have to account to the nth degree for everything for those federal dollars. So here, Amy and I came into this, and here is HISA wanting all these things, and we go, okay, fine. It's fine for a federal agency to want a state to do things. But then we started doing the RCA dog and going, you're going to do what? And you're making your rules. How? This doesn't have to be this hard. So what Amy has brought up, and I'm telling those of you who haven't heard it from her, you can hear it from me. It's the same thing. It's a master cooperative agreement. These have been going on between federal agencies and states, and not just DOD and the Guard. You take any state law enforcement thing, you hear the feds say, well, we're going to do this or this or this in law enforcement. Well, they don't send down federal law enforcement officers to be a parallel force. They call up the state, say, oh, you're doing this. We want this much more. Here's this much money. We'll give you the money. You have to demonstrate that you did it. Federal grants. And essentially that's what Master Cooperative Agreement is. So what we have offered is, why are we inventing a whole new mechanism when something has been very well road tested, and a lot of people in the racing business have not been in the Guard because it's a little inconvenient to get called up for your annual tour when you got a horse you're trying to prep up into the races. But still, you can develop however stringent a standard that you feel needs to be met that exceeds what the state is capable of doing. And that's been some of what HISA has tried to beat us over the head. Well, the states just haven't been able to do it to the standard we want. Well, fine. Give me the money. I would love to have 5 more veterinarians. I'd like to clone my chief vet right there and have 5 more of him. I don't have the money for that, if they even existed. if indeed you want to have those standards, and if you want to agree on national standards, I think we have a heck of a run and start with ARCI. I mean, what a place to start, if not almost at the finish line. But what we're saying is these things don't have to happen in secret. You don't have to have a body of people who are anonymous and wave the magic wand and have the electric hammer. The hammer is very clear. Here are the standards that you must meet. If you accept the money, that's the contract. You're going to meet those standards. We'll be watching. We're going to come down and take a look. So HISA can send down if they become this kind of thing, because for all of the Texas Military Department and $500 million, they got one guy and 2 assistants, and they monitor that indeed we're spending the money the way it's supposed to be. And what's the hook if we misspend the money? Felony charges. So, we understand this is serious, but this is a system that has worked. It has worked to the nth degree in a much broader, much deeper, and far more complex. I mean, what they're asking us to do is complex, but you start taking a look at a third of the entire United States Air Force. That's pretty complex, and we do it. And this is the way. If the feds want something, here's the standards, here's the money. Here's how you account for it. If you don't live up to it, then we're going to talk. We're either going to take the money away, or we have to decide where's the delta. And with each state, your deltas might be different. But this is not rocket science on the basic structure, and it does not have to be an independent group that, as the lawyers have put out there, very well may be treading upon our rights in the Constitution. I'm a states' rights kind of gal. That's kind of part what it takes to be in Texas. We like it. We talk about secession every now and then, too. Not today. We won't go there. But then for state-to-state support, again, this has been going on in the Guard forever. You take a look. What are the states that we are likely to support? Louisiana and Texas have had a state-to-state agreement forever. We slow down at Orange, Texas. Okay, is the state-to-state agreement signed? Okay, press on, and in we come. Last time, about a few years ago, I was in this very same town in a very different outfit. It looked a lot like camouflage. But state-to-state agreements can be formed. So if indeed we want to have it everybody who's in racing, again, then here's the state standards. Or there may be times that a state-to-state might have specific things. We are going to share. This is not difficult. These things have been going on for years and years and years. So what we're saying is you can maintain your state sovereignty. I promise you, Governor Abbott is not the least bit interested in relinquishing the Texas Racing Commission's responsibility to regulate racing. And our state statute has words like will and shall. Last time I checked, that doesn't give much wiggle room. But do we want a higher quality of racing? Do we want greater integrity? You bet. Can we do everything that they're doing to the same standards with the budget that we currently have? No. But we are more than willing, and we are excited to meet that level. But it's all about resources. And we will be as accountable as anybody on the planet. We know how to do this. This is not that hard. But a master cooperative agreement gets us there. If you've never heard of such thing and you're in a state agency, taxi on down to your local National Guard, find out who the USPFO office is. That's the United States Property and Fiscal Office. Say, tell me about master cooperative agreements. Sit down, fasten your seatbelt. You will get the fire hose. But essentially it's standards, cost this much money. If there's equipment involved, here's what it takes. We'll allow you to play with our toys, but here's how we're going to make sure that you're living up to it. If you don't live up to it, there's consequences. If you do, press on. So this does not have to be a new creation of a authority that happens in the dark of night in December attached to another bill. States know how to interface with the feds. We know how to be accountable. We can do it. Our governors do not have to relinquish any state sovereignty, but we can meet the standards for a federal program, and we can water their eyes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wall. So I wanted to also allow for Ed Martin, who's, as many of you know, is pretty shy, doesn't talk a lot. It's really hard to get him upset and throwing his hands around. But no, I wanted Ed to come up. Obviously, I know that the ARCI, or the racing commissioners, as a whole, are under a lot of pressure, but they also have to be willing to do and/or serve as they're told. So at the end of the day, you know, the ARCI is in a position to where, like our affiliates in the HBPA, everyone has the opportunity as a commission to do what their state wants them to do, whether it be sign the voluntary agreement or not, or help with the fees or not. So it puts Ed, like myself, sometimes in difficult situations. I have, at the present time, all of my affiliates are 100% supportive of the direction that we're going, but at times, again, I appreciate Ed's understanding that and HISA is the law right now, that's what they have to do. And we understand that and respect that. But we wanted to give Ed an opportunity to talk about what I think is still very much something that Ed began talking about in some of our congressional testimony. There is a different way, and it would have been, to Dr. McNabb's point, much more simple than the road that we've been forced to go down. So, Ed.
Thanks, Eric. You have tanks and infantry and guns. That's good to know.
We like it.
I want to disagree with Eric on something. The racing commissions are not going anywhere. So this is not an interest of anybody's job, as if you think being a regulator is a great job. It's a pain in the, well, we do what we're supposed to do, and what we try to do is to try to do the right thing. The ARCI was not for the HISA Act. We were politically astute enough to see that when you have the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader of the Senate endorsing a bill, it's like a greased pig coming down a slide at the county fair. So we didn't get in the way of that because it wouldn't have done any good. Our concern from the get-go is that this not turn into a mess, and we spent considerable hours, I personally spent considerable hours trying to explain to HISA and open doors at the state level with each individual state so that they could understand the issues that they would come into in trying to transition to this new federal regulatory scheme. HISA has had a golden opportunity, which I think they've blown. So here we are. We're in a mess. What I heard this morning is this litigation will probably play on for 2 more years. The question is what happens on March 27th. Certainly the Sixth Circuit decision could give enough political cover for the FTC to just kind of throw the HISA rules on, and now that will obviously be challenged. So here we have a bunch of states who call me every day saying, who's going to collect the samples on March 28th? There's one state that's got an implementation agreement. I know a lot of other states are talking to them. I know an equally large state has told them, you're on your own. And there are other states pretty much saying you're on your own too. The brutal fact of the matter is I'm not really convinced they're ready, even if everything were to go their way. So this is a mess. I'd like to say, just as a programming note, Eric, I remember when Eric was doing the agenda and he said to me, he said, do you think we can get HISA to come and kind of talk to us all and then maybe have a kind of a private meeting where maybe we all can get on the same page and put an end to all this stuff, which is kind of what I called for last August, to kind of get everybody in a room, because this is a very painful process. And I said, Eric, I think that's very noble of the HBPA. I says, we're all for it. We'd love to have that discussion. Have at it. And so that didn't work out. So now we've got this big gap on the program today. I do want to say, for those of you who are U.S. state regulators, and our Canadian regulators who are here are certainly welcome to come in. When we have our meetings across the provinces with the CPMA and the provincial racing authorities in Canada, they ask me to tell them what's going on in the U.S., and everybody shakes their head like, we're glad we're not down there with you. And I think they all came down for this meeting because this is all entertaining. That's what not to do. But at 3:45, where we had the RCI committee meetings yesterday, I'm going to ask all the U.S. racing regulators to come upstairs for kind of a HISA therapy session, because I've got some ideas based on things that I've thought, and I just want to bounce them off everybody, and everybody's wondering what everybody else is planning to do, and I think that's a good opportunity to have that private discussion. So that'll be after this for the racing regulators. Interstate compacts, the ARCI has long been a supporter of an interstate compact as a way to avoid federal government getting into something that's handled by the states. I think it's welcome that the HBPA has interest in this. I know I came and kind of hawked this, and you folks were divided on this issue, as were other organizations. There are some states that did put interstate compact language on the books: Maryland, Delaware. I believe Indiana has given the authority to join an interstate compact to their racing commission. I know that Colorado has that authority. Nobody's pulled the trigger and created one because, frankly, if you're going to have uniformity, you really should have everybody in it. And Kentucky's got a law on the books, but it would probably have to be changed. That's if you went the state route. That's the longer route. I've been approached by a congressional office that has indicated that perhaps they might be interested in looking at that compact authority as a way to keep the state infrastructure and the state investments in this in place, so as not to bankrupt an industry trying to replicate things that are already done. Last summer, most states did not pay the HISA assessment. There were only a couple, 4. And most states, and the racetrack started getting those bills under the HISA cost allocation. And needless to say, the racetracks were not happy about that. Now, the HISA assessments have gone out anticipating approval of an anti-doping and medication control program that is far more costly than anything they had last summer. And to my knowledge, I'm not sure of any state that has agreed to pay them the assessment. So those burdens are going to go onto the tracks as well. And again, the state racing commissions aren't going anywhere. The state personnel, there might in some jurisdictions be a reduction in personnel that might be less costly if the state racing commission is funded directly by the industry, but is it a dollar for dollar reduction for the increase you're going to have to pay? It's probably not. Here's what I think, and I'm not a lawyer, but I've been practicing law for 30 plus years without a license. What the Sixth Circuit did, after reading that opinion 3 times and sleeping on it for 2 nights and thinking about it, and then listening to everybody here this morning, the Sixth Circuit pretty much diminished HISA. The regulator is the FTC. That ruling pretty much said a HISA enforcement action is not final. That's not final. It's the FTC that makes it final. So, having once worked for a federal regulatory commission, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the concept of all of a sudden the Federal Trade Commission getting a bunch of clenbuterol positives to hear is not something that's going to go over in the internal staff meetings very well. It's like, what the hell? So that kind of weakens that whole adjudication arbitration system that HISA has kind of embodied or created for themselves. You know, we say, and that's the way it is. It's not necessarily going to be the way it is. The other thing I got out of reading that thing is that if you don't like a HISA rule, HISA is essentially just an advisory committee. You don't even have to go to HISA to try to get a rule changed. You can go directly to the FTC. And by the way, if you don't get satisfaction by going to the FTC, well, you can go to your congressman or your senator, and your congressman or senator start writing letters to the FTC, and having overseen a congressional relations office for a federal regulatory commission, you don't like it when those congressional letters start showing up in the agency. Especially if they're saying you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. Or what due diligence did you do before you approved this? And then they get called up in front of Congress for oversight hearings. It's a little different than HISA showing up in front of the Friendly Energy and Commerce Committee, which I'm not sure would be so friendly given the political change. So a lot changed with that decision, and let's just assume, I'm not sure it's a good assumption, but let's just assume that sticks. I'm not sure the people who originally tried to create this thing really envisioned that this thing was not going to be all powerful as it was intended to be, but now we have put a federal agency with not one veterinarian, no experience in equine care, no experience, as was said by one of the lawyers here this morning, in any of this stuff, in charge. And, you know, I've written some recent letters. I've been kind of stayed out of the press on all this throughout the whole thing. And I tried to make the point that, you know, Santa Claus is stuck in the chimney and the people who are for it are trying to push him down with a stick. And that you don't need Santa Claus to be pushed through the chimney with a stick in order to have Christmas. And that obviously got under some people's skin. And me personally, and the people I work for, were roundly insulted, which, you know, I ended up having to respond to. And there was somebody who, I won't say, called me up and said, who ghostwrites your stuff? And I said, nobody does. I just am blessed to have an ability to say what I think. This is a mess. And I'll tell you, there's not a regulator sitting in this room, or even the ones that are not in this room, who are not concerned about how this plays out. And it's not about the states loving to do the anti-doping program. I tell you right now, the anti-doping program that everybody's been doing for years is a pain in the A. And because everybody, and HISA, I think, is going to understand that to the extent they ever get really into this. They're learning about how complicated and hard it is to regulate this sport. You can't sit in an ivory tower and think you've got all the answers, because you don't. And then when you go out and you start implementing them, you start affecting real-life people. And you start impacting on the economics of an industry that was fragile to begin with in many quarters, which is a great sport, and there's many people working in it. But this sport may look very different. And it's not about being for HISA or against HISA. It's about saying the goals of that legislation were to have uniformity, better welfare policies, better ways to detect at-risk horses, combat the catastrophic breakdowns, and have a fair and equitable justice system. Everybody's for that. But it's not about whether you take the highway over here to get to your destination, or the highway here to get to your destination. Or maybe you take some local roads, you could still get to the same destination. I talked to a representative in the House of Representatives, was a co-sponsor of the HISA bill. Talked to that person's staff. And it was disgust. There was betrayal. Imagine how the animal rights organizations are going to feel, because everybody is tracking the catastrophic breakdowns. After a year, if there was no improvement, they're going to feel betrayed. And then where do we collectively stand there? Because they were sold that this was going to be the fix. HISA, if you were supporting HISA, it was expensive. They had a golden opportunity to get federal money to pay for it and mitigate the costs on everybody. I worked in the U.S. Senate for 10 years of my life. You had a $1.7 trillion spending bill. It was must pass. The Democrats controlled the House. They all were for HISA. It was a leadership bill to begin with. And Mitch McConnell had a 50-50 match in the Senate. You had to do it before January 1st. Because otherwise, the Republicans take over the House. The Republicans are a little more cheap than the Democrats are. And then Mitch McConnell lost his maximum leverage because he dropped down to 49 votes. So we made a pitch to say, get some money, put some money in this. If you're going to want to do this, then put some money in it, because the cost of this is going to be crushing. And they just ignored it. And I actually was called a liar in front of a congressman's face by the head staffer of the Jockey Club. And I wasn't calling a liar. I was using HISA's own information about what the per start cost in the state of Maryland was to start a horse, you know, at Pimlico or Laurel. That was the cost of HISA. Their own document. It's time to get the politics out of all this. You folks are in this fight because you're fighting for survival. The states care that everybody survives, but the states survive regardless. We just don't want to see this turn into a mess, and unfortunately, that's beyond our control. Now, there may be things that we can do, and I've got some very blunt thoughts I'm going to share with my members. But I think there will be a growing constituency that this isn't working. It's already growing by virtue of some of the congressional names that were rattled off to me by talking to the congressman's staff. You know, I do know this thing. When Charlie Gardner got up and talked about regular order, you know, that's how you pass legislation. That's how you make sure something is going to work and it's not going to make a mess. And having worked on Capitol Hill, when you hang something on a bill that has to go through, okay, it gets through, but you always come back and do a technical correction because you never got it right, especially when you slam dunk something. And that's what adults do. And I think that's what we're all open to do. So I don't know where this is going. But I do know this, I pray for this industry, because there are people who, for whatever it is, ego, power, I was right, you were wrong, I'm the good guy, you're the enemy. I mean, you know, I've heard too much of that crap. We hear it in our politics, and now, you know, everything wrong about politics has kind of come into horse racing. Everybody wants the same damn thing. So I don't know if I addressed what I was supposed to address, Eric, but that's what I had to say.
Well, it sounded good.
But I do want to know about those guns and tanks and things.
Yeah, drones.
Well, in fairness, I've got to correct Ed as well, since he corrected me, but I don't know that I'm ever thought of myself as a greased pig stopper, but basically a greased pig going down and nobody would jump in the way to stop it. I did. So I'm looking to stop it. And in fairness.
We're looking to get the greased pig out of the water supply.
So what I'll just kind of end with this, just kind of an outline of the discussions that we've had. And Ed is 100% correct. There are several members on the Hill, I'd say bipartisan and bicameral, that are very interested in a repeal of HISA, but they're also just as interested in moving something forward that is, again, driving from the ground up and utilizing the state commission infrastructure. So in this, if you can kind of put a mental flow chart up in your head, basically what we are considering is an example of federal interstate compact. So that's kind of the template of what some of these members, in particular in the House, are looking at. And with the Board of Directors, as we have suggested, again, it's not up to us to define, but the suggestion is a Board of Directors made up of 9 individuals that ultimately would be set, 5 of them set by the states that have the most number of racing dates. Now, it doesn't matter what breed, but the most number of racing dates. And the members of the compact would then pick the other 4, or I should say elect the other 4 members. So that's kind of the way I picture it in the world that we've been living in. It kind of becomes an ultimate model rules committee. That's how we see that 9-member group. And ultimately from there, we've also suggested emphatically that there be 3 scientific advisory committees, not 1, but 3. Why? 1 for each major racing breed. It doesn't mean that a member of that committee couldn't sit on more than 1 committee, but we think that there needs to be advisory to this ultimate decision-making organization, rules that are specific to the breed itself. So we think that's very important. In addition to that, a 4th committee, a safety committee. So looking at some of the same sort of structures that we have now or have seen with HISA, we again think that there's a model there. One of the things that we've also suggested, and I certainly can't say that this will come to fruition, but we have recommended that there be funding from the government funneled through the United States DA, so the Department of Agriculture, not to be considered or conflicted with the USADA, but the USDA be involved in equine research. So that's another aspect that we've suggested. So hopefully that could possibly bring in some funding, but at the end of the day, funding from the government is very difficult, and certainly we know that. The ultimate enforcement, we still feel like it comes from the racing commissions and the structure that we have now. Those infrastructures, those entities already exist. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, but we think that ultimately with the compact situation, having this discussion again like we're going to have on Thursday, a model rules type meeting, that's where the sausage gets made, and at the end of the day, the rules get applied, and then they will be applied to all members of the compact. We think it's a doable situation. We have members of Congress that think it's a doable situation, so we're going to kind of sit back and wait and see what they are able to come up with, and hopefully soon, but at the end of the day, the litigation is going to continue to play out, and while people look at us and say, what are you going to do next? Ultimately, it depends on what happens with the litigation. So for us, we feel as if there's something there. We feel as if there is an answer. We feel as if it's an answer that everybody will appreciate because all of the participants in the industry are going to be involved just as we are now with that extra stamp, developing something that can be considered national uniformity. So with that, I say the bar is open.